This week on Socratic Cinema.
Vietnam's also a really funny war to imagine Wonder Woman participating in. Because it's just like, it's so colored by our view of like Apocalypse Now and all of those movies. I'm just imagining Wonder Woman flying in on like her invisible jet with the classic music playing in the background. I forget the specific song. It's the Immigrant song in my head, but that's not the one.
Fortunate. I love to find like very interesting, well-respected works of literature and then put them into my silly little videos. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Socratic Cinema Podcast. My name is James DeLisio.
I'm Kasey Clark.
And I'm Charlie Heatherly.
Today, we are honored and thrilled to let you all know that we have got another special guest episode happening right here, right now. Today, we have the pleasure of being graced by Max Tohline, PhD, film scholar, video essayist extraordinaire. Max, thank you so much for joining us. We're very happy to have you.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
And for the viewers at home who may not know you, would you mind introducing yourself a little bit? Give us your elevator pitch.
The elevator pitch. Well, I'm originally from Ohio. I was studying to be an engineering student in Missouri when I decided that that was totally wrong. Went into English as a way to get into film, got a PhD in interdisciplinary arts, and taught film studies classes and philosophy and art theory classes for a while after that. Got into video essaying, and here we are.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. I'm a big, as you know, big fan of your work. A supercut of supercuts is like a brain melting masterpiece. Max and I met in a group, I guess is the word, for video essayists, the Essay Library. If you've seen any of our 1-minute micro essays, those are part of big Essay Library collaborations. Max has also been sort of my essayist mentor for the past few months. You have him to thank for the Ponyo and Death Stranding videos not being horrible. And I've learned a lot from conversations with him, and so I'm very excited to have him on the show. What are we watching this week, Max? What's the film?
Well, this week we are watching the 1930 Lewis Milestone masterpiece, All Quiet on the Western Front, adaptation of Remarque's novel, often considered one of the great war novels or just novels, period, of all time. And so for everybody who was forced to read it in high school, who found out that there's a Netflix remake on the way, I said, how dare we watch the Netflix remake without me forcing you to eat your vegetables and watch the 1930 original. But I don't know if it felt like vegetables or if it felt like steak, but it feels like steak to me. So I hope you enjoyed it.
I know I can say that I certainly did. I think this is, by probably like 40 years, the oldest movie on the Socratic Cinema Podcast. So the ignorant youth are finally paying our dues here, which I think is a good thing. But let's start out by, I mean, we usually start out with our initial impressions. But I know, Max, you mentioned to me that you taught this film a few times in some of your classes. What is the, like, what do you hope students learn from this film? Like, what makes it notable?
I think it's certainly a masterclass in film adaptation, in how to take the themes of a novel that are it's really an interior novel. It's first person narration from this soldier's perspective, how to take that interiority and translate it to the big screen. But for me, the way I used it in my intro film classes, the couple of times I taught it, was as a proving ground for how to put together an argument for the final paper they were writing. Basically, I'm going to show you this movie. It's going to be historically significant. It's going to be a film that you'll benefit from having seen, for sure. But also, let's see if we can figure out different arguments that we could make out of this toward a final paper. And you realize that all of the major strands of film theory, whether we're talking about Marxist criticism, class-related criticism, or if we're talking about gender theory, or if we're talking about psychoanalytic criticism, if we're talking about formalism, even if we're talking about eco-criticism, there's something in this movie that you can make an argument about. And so I used it as basically a proving ground for that, to sort of teach them ways into finding things worth making an argument about in movies with the movie they were going to write their final paper about.
Very interesting. I think you bring up a great point, that there's so many layers and angles to what's going on in this movie. I mean, I think for me, I was really, as a again, an ignorant youth, I tend to, I mentioned this to you before the show, I have a bad habit of associating a lot of older films with having a little bit of schlock, being a little, I guess, more campy. Just from, I mean, partly from the style of, the very dramatic acting. But I mean, even things like Rashomon or Citizen Kane are undeniably a little bit goofy, I think. And so
Take that back, you bastard.
I will. Okay, here's my I'm going to start us off with a hot take. I don't really like Rashomon that much, but I think I was really struck by how this movie defied so many of my expectations. I mean, everything from these massive, like crazily impressive set pieces of the trenches to a very somber interior. It's almost like an epic. I mean, Paul's journey, you really go from a drastically different point B from point A. And I almost don't know where to start. Maybe I'll pass it to Kasey or Charlie. What was your experience with this? Did you read the book? I had to read the book, and we all went to the same high school, so you guys better have read the book.
Kasey, you take this one.
Yeah, well, James, we were in the same class, so we did get to read the book. I enjoyed the movie. Looking at movies centered around war, they're not necessarily my go-to, but I do find myself enjoying them when I watch them. This movie in particular, I thought it was, as James was saying, very, very impressive, given that it was made in like the 30s. And I was able to, or I was definitely enjoying being able to have callbacks to having read the book, because I read that book in sophomore year high school. So it's been a minute. So just kind of getting reintroduced and re-immersing myself in that story. And it's great. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think the performances were good, and just the story itself is very like harrowing. It's very real. And I feel like it's good because nowadays it's hard to kind of separate military movies from like military propaganda. So I just felt like it was less propaganda-y, I guess, if that's a word.
Certainly. I mean, I know it was like banned in several countries for being so vehemently anti-war. So yeah, definitely not pro-military propaganda.
Yes.
Yeah, compare something like this to Top Gun Maverick, and I think
Whoa.
they are very different.
Top Gun Maverick really talks about the horrors of war in a way that I feel like we're
yeah, totally. Over beach football, of course.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously. So I actually have a very different experience with this movie because I have never read the book. And I was never forced to read the book in high school. I really do forget what I read instead of it, but I had no knowledge of this movie going into it. And I gotta say, I tried to come prepared. Max, you made me do something that I haven't done for 3 years at this point. I took notes on a movie that I watched.
Oh, which is so sorry.
I know you broke my streak. I can't believe that you've done this. And I think that after analyzing the movie critically, really I've come to what I think is actually a pretty powerful point. And it echoes something that was said in a classical song. War, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Say it again, y'all. And I think that, this movie, very not big on the whole war thing. It's very emotionally moving. It's a very sad movie. And I tried to watch it with my roommates. And I was just like, oh my God, this is reaching levels of emotional complexity that I wasn't aware that a movie from the 1930s necessarily could. Because I don't think I've actually, well, like I have watched something from like 19, I think like 25, like Three Bad Men. I forget when that movie came out, but like this movie really struck me with not only the way that it uses like special effects and cinematic techniques and all that to tell its story, but the acting is incredible and the story itself is incredible. So I struggle to separate what the movie was doing and what the actual story of the book was doing, because again, I've never read the book, but it left a very strong emotional impression on me. So, you know, if we're talking about the steak and veggies argument, this is like a rich filet mignon for me. I really, really did enjoy it.
I'm so glad that you felt sensorially immersed or something near that with the battle sequences, because so much of, like I said, the interiority of the novel, him describing how the front feels like this vortex that's drawing them closer and closer, and the emphasis over and over again on the earth and mud and just the materiality of warfare. I'm really glad that you got a sense of that through the movie, because that's one of the things that impressed the early viewers, probably more than anything else. I'm old enough to remember back in 1990, what is it, 8, when Saving Private Ryan came out, and the reports from cinema goers at that time feeling completely overwhelmed by how realistic the D-Day landing sequences were. That's exactly the effect that this movie had on its audiences in 1930. I had to pull up a review from Variety from 1930, because I think it gives you a sense of how this played to audiences at the time. Sorry for getting really pedagogical here.
No, this is what we wanted you for.
But
Yes.
We're going to learn today.
You just got to hear this line. No one in the audience could help but endorse that sentiment. For those before the screen that had endured with the German soldiers all of their horrors, frights, amputations, privations, and deaths, and the shells come hurtling over, the incessant noise louder and hotter now and again, but always there, always war, and that running explosion of a ground set of torpedoes that blew everybody and everything to bits as it progressed. It's all here, and it's all war.
Oh, Jesus. Wow.
Mm.
Movie reviews have gone downhill since then.
That was Variety, which was never exactly the most literary of review outlets, but you just got the sense that people felt, especially in those endless mow down sequences where you see the man's hands on the barbed wire after he gets blown up by the grenade.
Gosh.
Yeah.
And you're like, this isn't a movie from 1930? Yeah, it completely obliterated people at the time. They'd never seen anything like it. And there had been World War I epics, to be sure. The highest grossing movie of the silent era was a movie from 1925 called The Big Parade by King Vidor. There was one theater in upstate New York where it played almost 2 years. It was that popular.
Wow.
But so they had seen, you know, something of World War I on screen before, but nothing to this extent. And it was a big part of the advertising, the total immersion. There's one ad I found that advertised that they had a 280-ton crane with the camera on top of it swooping over the battlefield. Now I have reasons to doubt that the crane actually weighed 280 tons, but they like to emphasize the all-out expenditure of studio resources to put you right into the middle of it. And those sequences go on a long time, and I feel like even now they play in a pretty surprising way to us just because they go on for so long.
Yeah, I mean they're pretty significant stretches of the film where you really don't. I mean, there's the focus is not even on Paul, like, at all. In some of these extended trench scenes, and maybe it's just my, like, bad facial recognition, but to my knowledge, it was just like minutes and minutes of just warfare. I mean, no Paul, no Cat, no nothing. And there was, yeah, it was really striking because I mean it was so all encompassing. It's yeah, it was very striking. I was also struck by, I mean, I just think that it's kind of crazy that um this is only like 15 or so years after the war, right? I feel like I feel like nowadays we don't get. I mean, it seems to me that we wait a little bit before adapting something. I mean, I think of like Saving Private Ryan to me is like the defining World War II movie, which is like 40 years after the event. But this, I mean, I imagine part of the impact of this might maybe have been from just how hot off the press it was. I mean, I can imagine that being kind of crazy to see so realistically recreated something you experienced in your lifetime. I mean, I don't know that that's something that I've experienced in my lifetime, and I wonder when the COVID movies start coming out if I will feel that.
I
Um,
have a point really, really quickly because I'm in an introduction to film class.
okay.
And on your point, James, about like society reacting quickly to these kinds of events, I watched a movie called Kimmy the other day by Steven Soderbergh, and it was very mid tier. But the point of it is a movie explicitly about the pandemic. Like it is about someone who suffered from agoraphobia, overcame it partially, and then when the pandemic hit, like it all came flooding back and then became even more of an agoraphobe. And we're already seeing a lot of reactions to the pandemic through media, Kimmy being one of the examples. But I also thought it was really shocking that this has to be an adaptation of a novel too. So I don't know when the book came out, but like it was a relatively fast novel is made, then they turn around and make it into a movie. It's sort of similar to The Godfather, actually, with Puzo's. I forget what the name of his novel was, but there was a very quick turnaround on that too.
Hmm. And I mean, so Kimmy is like explicitly. When did it come out?
It came out this year.
Oh wow! So it is definitely like explicitly based on COVID, huh? I mean, not to plug our videos, but I certainly am familiar with the way that retroactively we can ascribe this historical significance to media, like a la Death Stranding COVID moment, or the Lord of the Rings 9/11 connection that Max, you were actually the person who put me onto that, and that's the reason that is in the video, and that was such a, I mean, that idea of seeing history or your present moment like reflected in media that already exists was just such a strange idea to me that sort of lives in my head always after learning about that. Yeah,
So
it's a striking thing.
maybe there's just some gaps in historical memory here, because like I said, the Big Parade came out 5 years before this and was the #1 grossing movie of the silent era, and that was a World War I film.
Hmm.
The armistice is declared November 1918, and so that was only 7 years later, and there had actually been other ones before that. There were plenty of
Wow.
World War I movies made immediately after. The same thing goes for World War II, and there were World War II movies made during the war. I mean, what was Mrs. Miniver? What was Casablanca? Both of those won
Oh
Best
my.
Picture during the war. So,
Yeah. I mean, do we just not do that anymore? Like I can't think of many like Desert Storm movies. I don't.
right. So maybe we need to be asking a deeper question about how studios and other media outlets finance films, and the, shall we say, moral cowardice of these studios when it comes to making films about, say, the Iraq War and the Afghanistan and things like that. Not that none have been made. There have been some made, like The Messenger, Stop Loss, Generation Kill. There have been movies made about it. The
Mhm.
Hurt Locker obviously did very well if we're just talking about mainstream prizes. Uh, but you're right. I get the sense that studios are less willing to actually take a stand on something, and that because of that, we find the higher profile war movies that we're seeing today, and we're really not seeing that many war movies anymore. It doesn't seem to be a super popular genre, which for a lot of reasons seems fine to me. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but for other reasons, maybe we should be educated about the horrors of it, lest we forget. But that said, I do see a certain amount of retreat into the past, and for me, the #1 example of this is the first Gal Gadot Wonder Woman movie.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I
I mean,
only bring it up because that was also set during World War I. Can I ask you guys a teacher question?
Please.
Yes, prof.
Only if Kasey's okay with it.
Kasey?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Why was the Gal Gadot Wonder Woman movie, the first one, set during World War I?
I think
obviously it had to be set during some sort of war because of various themes, and Ares has to show up in the movie and all that. But why World War I? They had a lot of wars to pick from.
I think it's a popular conscious sort of thing. Like, I completely understand why they didn't do World War II, because I think studios are very afraid to touch World War II in any Nazi imagery. And I think setting it in a later war, a lot of those just aren't as highly publicized. Like, hey, we're going to have Wonder Woman in the Korean War. It's like, what? That's weird. That's a weird choice to make. So out of the big wars that people know, the World War I or the World War II, World War I is the one that doesn't have the Nazis, and you don't need to deal with that sort of conflict. So
yeah, I was going to say it feels safe. I mean, I'm thinking about stuff like how much of a smash hit 1917 was. World War I feels almost like a safer war to talk about. I don't know why, but you mentioned the phrase like retreat into the past. I was thinking about that as we were talking. It feels like it's been long enough that people can sort of look at it and say and point and go like good guy, bad guy, and we don't really have to think too hard about the implications of it with something like how we would with something like Vietnam. That would be my guess, Kasey.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that there's it's clearer in who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, so you don't have to worry about who you're trying to basically, like, if you don't want to offend anyone. So if you're going to tackle like something like Vietnam or something like the Korean War, like where the lines kind of get a little blurry, it's just a lot easier to deal with. And I think like I guess the haha funny answer would be to have Wonder Woman walk through no man's land and get that shot. But yeah, pretty much I think you guys covered it.
Vietnam's also a really funny war to imagine Wonder Woman participating in, because it's just like, it's so colored by our view of like Apocalypse Now and all of those movies. I'm just imagining Wonder Woman flying in on like her invisible jet with the classic music playing in the background. I forget the specific song. It's the Immigrant song in my head, but that's not the one.
Fortunate Son, no?
Yeah, Fortunate Son playing as Wonder Woman comes in on the invisible jet.
That's Full Metal Jacket, but I see your
Full Metal Jacket. Yeah, they're all the same movie.
Oh boy.
I'm kidding. I really like Apocalypse Now, and apparently my memory after having only 5 hours of sleep last night is waning, so I apologize.
Yeah, but 17 million people died in World War I. What I'm trying to say is it's not a less serious war. It's
right.
not
Yeah.
more appropriate for shoving a superhero into the middle of. It's just farther in the past. So there's nobody left to get offended for the utter distastefulness of shoving a superhero into the middle of this real battlefield.
Right.
And
I mean, yeah.
And also, they're guaranteeing that it will be absolutely politically toothless. Because, again, how could it make a statement that has any real, specific, immediate political meaning if it's set in a war that's 100 years old?
Yeah, I mean, and you're, it's such a straight, like, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that comes from that, huh? I mean, sort of defanging World War I, which I know by many is agreed to have been like one of the most horrific wars. I mean, trench warfare was, as we saw in All Quiet, a nightmare. And so it's curious that that's sort of becoming like the popular setting. I mean, 1917 is a interesting thing too. And I mean, now with another All Quiet remake, I hope they don't pacify it. I hope they really maintain the horror that was captured in this one. I'm sort of now a little bit scared for an All Quiet remake in Year of Our Lord 2022.
Yeah, I'm not scared at all.
Huh?
Oh. I'm not scared at all. I think that because there was also a third All Quiet on the Western Front movie, the one in like the 70s, I think. Because I kept accidentally watching that one instead of the first one, and I was like, no, YouTube, I want the other one. But I think that these filmmakers probably have enough to go off of to see how do you talk about World War I in a way that evokes an emotional reaction for the audience and shows them the true horrors of it. Like there's so many examples of it, and there's so many modern examples that have done it with other wars, and the reception's already good. Like I'm confident that they'll be able to pull something together. And if they didn't, then they just simply didn't do their homework and either watch the movie that they are making a remake of / a new adaptation of, or didn't watch like 1917 or even something, going forward, like Saving Private Ryan. Like all of those do a very good job and they could pull from any one of them.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of knots in this conversation. It's certainly not an easy thing to talk about. And we talked about it a little bit with Top Gun Maverick. It really is an interesting thing how much people liked that movie. I mean, I know there were like real TikToks of people who joined the Air Force because of Top Gun Maverick. And that movie's still playing in theaters, I didn't know that, but it's still airing months and months and months later. Yeah, strange.
One of the reasons why Tom Cruise didn't make a Top Gun 2 back in the 80s is because it drove military recruitment so successfully when the original one came out in 1986. In fact, he pivoted and made Born on the 4th of July instead to try to basically atone for how much of a pro-war movie he had made and the damage he realized it was causing, or that he thought it was causing. But I guess time makes us forget. So he got around to making a second one.
Yeah, there's a quote from The Things They Carried, from How to Tell a True War Story, which I really felt kind of in this film, All Quiet, that I think the fact that I see it repeated across two of the most notable and kind of praised war things makes me feel that it's worth remembering, which is that quote, if at the end of a war story you feel uplifted, or if you feel that some small bit of rectitude has been salvaged from the larger waste, then you have been made the victim of a very old and terrible lie. As a first rule of thumb, therefore, you can tell a true war story by its absolute and uncompromising allegiance to obscenity and evil. And you read that and you go, wow, true. And then you watch Top Gun Maverick and you go, what happened?
but the planes go fast, James. They go so fast in that movie.
I know, the planes go so fast and they blow up the unnamed foreign bad guys.
God, good part, that one.
Yeah. I think this movie was banned in a lot of places, right? I think I was reading that on the IMDb page. We haven't had a lot of. I want to see. We'll know if the new All Quiet is a success based on how much backlash it gets from various political parties.
Nice.
I will say. I'm going to say that.
Well, and at least from my very limited historical knowledge, one of the big countries that banned it was Nazi Germany, because they thought that it portrayed Germany as the cowards. And there was some crazy thing that they did at a screening of it where they threw tear gas or something into the theater to drive people out of it. But and this is all from Wikipedia, but yeah, it's probably not going to be banned in the same capacity that it was back then, just because the wound was fresher. But I imagine that there might be some backlash and stuff. But if you're telling the truth if somebody bans your movie, because that's what happened with Persepolis, which is another movie that we just watched in that cinema class, and that was banned in several places across the globe because it told such a truthful story.
Persepolis is incredible. High recommendation.
So good. Yeah, y'all got to watch it.
Oh, okay. I gotta get on and you gotta read Calvin and Hobbes.
Oh, yeah.
I think they have the same moral imperative.
Very true. Very true. It's going at the top of my list.
There's a lot of wisdom in Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah, like how to build a snowman and how to get a pet tiger imaginary friend. That's all I know. Those are literally the two things I know about Calvin and Hobbes, is that there's a tiger in it and that they build a lot of snowmen.
Oh, you have so much to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kasey, can you believe that his picture is of Calvin and he's never read Calvin and Hobbes?
Yeah, that's really odd to me.
Yeah,
my
almost like you're
childhood dogs were named Calvin and Hobbes, so
Oh,
it
that's
was like a
lovely.
family staple thing.
Oh, now okay, now I'm just respecting their memory. I see. I understand.
Yeah, just a little bit, but it's okay.
Okay,
Weird
viewers,
poser.
just so you know what we're talking about, on Discord we each have profile pics, and everyone has a very cool profile pic, and mine is I don't know which one this is. Calvin probably. Wait, no, yeah, maybe, I don't know. It's of the boy, right? And
Gosh.
my friend has the other one, and I was going to change it to Tintin because I loved that movie and Hergé and all of the comics. I'm reading through more of them now. I was going to change it to Tintin, but I am lazy when it comes to incredibly small things, so I did not change it, and
When
it
you
is still one of them.
That all of our pictures are so cool, I was reminded that Kasey's picture is the cart Titan from Attack on Titan holding
It
a
is.
blunt.
Yeah,
Holding a blunt? Wait, really?
I haven't changed it. Yeah, because I don't even know if I want to try to defend this. I thought it was funny, and then I
I don't know if
forgot to
it's worth
change it. So
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
that is basically the.
And then, Max, what is
explanation.
yours?
Oh, it's a little artwork I made out of ink and wax years ago.
wow.
that I put in a light box. It's just an abstract thing that I thought would be a good avatar.
No, it works.
Nice.
I didn't want anybody to recognize what the avatar was. I figured I'd make my own little iconography there.
Yeah, I stick with the classic dog picture. It's
works.
it's safe. It's inoffensive. But
Speaking of safe and inoffensive,
yeah,
I absolutely have to share with you, because I know that we've got limited time for this podcast, and I don't want to just bloviate all day, but I have to share at least one little story about the making of this film. They went through 8 or 9 different versions of the ending, because if you've read the novel, then you know that the ending is basically unfilmable. It all happens interiorly, and maybe we'll tell Charlie what the ending is a little bit later.
Please.
So that he can understand what's going on there. But they went through 8 or 9 different versions of trying to figure out how to end this film. They landed on the one we saw today. The production had already, at least the legend goes, that the production had already closed. And it was just Louis Milestone, the director, and Karl Freund, who we know as being the cinematographer for Metropolis and a bunch of other great German silent films. He wasn't even the main cinematographer on this one. He was like an uncredited second cinematographer. But it was Milestone and Freund went out to the battlefield, and Milestone provided the hand, and they shot that insert with the butterfly.
Wow.
Lou Ayres wasn't even there. At least that's the story.
I mean, that's great. It's such a great shot too. I mean,
it's unbelievable. And again, it comes back to this idea about the relationship between man and the earth, the environment, the destruction of the environment, nature, but also the ongoing thematics of the earth being the mother, and press yourself down to her if you want to survive, and Paul's relationship with his own mother, that's all through the novel. But anyway.
Yeah.
They showed it to Carl Laemmle, who's the producer, who was the head of the studio, and he wasn't super happy, but only because he was thinking from a businessman perspective, and he suggested that maybe they should try to write a happy ending instead.
True, so true.
To which again, the legend goes, and when you go back 90 years in the history of Hollywood, you really shouldn't expect that any of this is true. But the legend goes that Milestone mockingly countered with, quote, "Maybe we should make the Germans win the war."
That's great. Oh, that's great.
And that was that, I guess. I guess Laemmle backed off and said, okay, I guess we can't make the Germans win the war, so you get your ending. But it's kind of a miracle that this movie survived in as bleak a form as it survives, given the merriment factory that Hollywood was at the time and still is now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking, I'm trying to remember. I remember reading the last chapter and really like being affected by it. And yeah, it's almost entirely. I mean, most of the book is internal monologue. Um, so I really would be curious to know what the writing process for the movie was like. How do you take that that's so interior and sort of extrapolate out? Because I mean, it's a very faithful adaptation, despite being such a wildly different form of it. Um, I think, gosh, the sequence with the dead man in the crater, that that was horrifying in the book, and it's horrifying in the film. And to me, that's really the moment where the Paul's sort of downward spiral really kicks up. That and the death of oh gosh, I forget his name, the kid with the boots.
Mm.
Yeah, those two moments really stick out to me in this sort of
Yeah, you're
in
talking about
Paul's
Franz?
journey. Yes, yeah. They amputate his leg, and Paul watches him die in the hospital. Um, and it's, yeah, it's hard. There's a lot of hard moments
I'm
in
even
this
more
one.
amazed by the way they wordlessly tell the story of what happened to his boots after that. Because
Yes. Yeah.
you go to
Yeah.
Mueller, and it's just a series of close-ups of the boots as we see the rest of Mueller's life, which is talk about cinema.
Yeah.
Not a word necessary.
No, yeah. Speaking of that, I mean, when did the switch to from silent to, audio? Because when did that happen? Because I know this was Milestone's first movie with sound. Um,
Yeah.
but just timeline wise, how is this like one of the earlier sound movies?
It is one of the earlier ones. So in you first get your like single reel sync sound experiments in the mid-20s, but the first feature-length film, we all know, The Jazz Singer, that had sound sequences in it, was October 1927. And the conversion to sound happens pretty quickly. The first year at the Oscars was the only year a silent film won Best Picture, Wings, another war movie, as it turns out. Then a big song and dance spectacle movie, The Broadway Melody, wins the next year, which is incredibly forgettable. And then this is the third year of the Oscars, 1929, 1930. So yeah, it was still pretty early in the sound era, but by this point, basically the only person still making silent movies, at least in the West, is Charlie Chaplin. And
Ah.
the silent
Mm.
cinema would persist in other countries a little bit longer for various reasons, some due to budget, others due to local tradition. But yeah, by 1930, basically everybody had converted to sound. Now that doesn't mean the sound technology was exactly up to modern snuff yet, as we could hear in this film. Some of it comes through a little garbled, but if you compare it to other films made at the time, the dynamics of this sound mix is absolutely miraculous.
Mm. I mean, just the way everything, especially in the battle sequences, sound,
Yeah.
so overwhelming. Like I would have loved to watch this with like a big surround sound setup instead of my tinny uh, gamer headphones. Um, I feel like I almost did myself a little bit of a disservice, but you do what you can when you're in a college dorm, I guess. Um, yeah. So very interesting. I don't know that I've ever really seen a full silent feature. We'll have to keep digging backwards.
Oh God, Three Bed Men. That was one hell of a movie to watch through.
I think we should watch the 8-hour cut of McTeague.
Hey, what if we don't watch the 8-hour cut of McTeague?
I
Okay,
think,
so
I think
that doesn't exist. I
Oh.
got to start there. So first of all, you're talking about Eric von Stroheim's 1924 film Greed, which was the
Yes.
adaptation of the novel McTeague. Yeah, Frank Norris's McTeague, amazing novel. I don't know if you've read the novel, fantastic, but probably an even better movie. It was originally 9.5 hours. 44 reels, I think, was the
Oh my
running time.
gosh.
He
Mm.
screened it for a small group of critics in January of 1924, all of whom stayed through the entirety of the screening, which is remarkable in and of itself, and basically unanimously said this is the most incredible thing we've ever seen. But then, of course, Louis B. Mayer who was the head of Metro Goldwyn at the time. It later became Metro Goldwyn Mayer, MGM. Yeah, but Louis B. Mayer basically said, well, we can't release this at 9.5 hours. And he said, well, yes, obviously, I know that. So he cut it down to 6 and said, I've got this great idea. People could watch the first 3 hours, go to dinner, and come back and watch the other 3 hours. Because people did that with really long Wagner operas. So it's like, what if movies were like Wagner, like big operas? And they said, yeah, no, we're not going to do that either. Keep cutting. He cut it down to 4 and said, I can't take a single further frame out of this thing. And Louis B. Mayer said, well, if that's the best you can do, thank you very much. And he gave it to a guy who hadn't even read the script, who proceeded to cut it down to 2 hours. And it was released at that 2-hour length. And even mutilated all the way down to 2 hours, probably about 2 hours and 10 minutes. Somewhere in there, even mutilated at that running time, it was still received by basically every critic as being one of the most, realistic and harrowing works of art that the screen had yet produced. And it still showed up on early Sight and Sound polls of the greatest movies ever made, like in the 50s. But the rest of the reels of that film, the other 7 hours, were melted down and recycled for their silver content, as was a standard Hollywood practice at the time of recycling unused footage.
No. Yeah.
So that doesn't exist anymore. However, in 1999, a guy named Rick Schmidlin went back and made a reconstruction to the 4-hour length, because there was like some sort of script or note script that existed from the 4-hour version. And he went back through that and he basically took production stills, so pictures that continuity people would take at the time of how the actors were arranged, in the frame, that sort of thing, just for reference purposes. He got hundreds of those production stills and cut them back in place of the missing scenes with little pans and zooms, Ken Burns effects on them to stand in for the missing scenes. And he had Robert Israel, who is a renowned writer of new silent movie scores. He had Robert Israel write 4 new hours of music for it, and it premiered on Turner Classic Movies in 1999. And that 4-hour reconstruction of Greed used to be my favorite movie of all time.
Really? Wow. I haven't seen nor read. I only know about Greed from my second ever video essay about Cats, the movie.
Jesus.
I love to find like very interesting, well-respected works of literature and then put them into my silly little videos. It's my favorite hobby. But gosh, wow, that is interesting and very sad. I mean, nowadays, if you have a 9-hour movie, Netflix says, "Hey, that's a 1-season miniseries," and you've got your product. Wow. So wait, Sight and Sound has been around for how long? Has Sight and Sound been around?
A pretty long time. Again, their first poll of the greatest movies of all time was 1952, and they've done it every 10 years since. So I don't know how long they existed before then, but at least back to then.
I only know Sight and Sound from the video essay polls, as it's always a big holiday when those come out.
Right, that's a super new thing, because of course it was originally like Fandor ran those polls, I think it was, and then when Fandor ceased to exist, Sight and Sound said, okay, we'll host it, but it doesn't go in their print magazine. Not that anybody buys that anyway, but it's just the same thing.
And you were you were on the panel? You were
I was a voter.
A voter, which is which is really cool.
It was fun.
No, yeah,
an honor.
I'm sure it was. You probably got to see a lot of great stuff. You got to honor some of our one of our other guests, Kaylin Meadows, who was featured like a bunch of times on that best video essays list. We're getting the cream of the video essay crop here. I'm very, very happy to talk to so many wonderful creators about this. Where do we go from here?
I have a thing. I want to say a thing.
Say it.
I know that we were talking about sound, right? And one of the things that we kept talking about was that during the battle scenes, the sound was so intense. For me, the sound was the most prominent and the most effective in everything but the battle scenes because it is so insanely oppressive. The constant sound of shell fire while they are in the trenches or just like at a field hospital or just anywhere, it is always in the background and it drives you mad. And it really reminds me of what they did in Dunkirk. And I'm sure that Christopher Nolan probably took this technique from either this movie or one that uses a similar thing that was inspired by this movie. But in Dunkirk, there's always the sound of a ticking clock in the background. And it just gives you this like insane gripping intensity. And it actually made me feel like physically sick to my stomach when I was watching the movie in the theater because it's so overwhelming to your ears. But in this movie, I had the luxury of not hearing it on, like a big giant sound system, although I would love to hear that. And I did not get physically ill, but it did make me feel the same sort of claustrophobia that all of these characters are feeling, being trapped inside these like small confines, not being able to sleep because the shelling is so consistent and so loud. And it's really one of the cool things that movies and other forms of media, I would say very similar to video games, can do, is that they can pick one of those senses. They can pick sight or sound. Tying it back into the last conversation. They can really run with that, and they can really give you an experience that immerses you within whatever they're talking about. So I just wanted to point that out because I'm sure that other people have probably experienced that same sort of thing. But it really got to me, and when the 2.5 hours or however long the movie is ended, I was like, oh, thank God I don't have to hear the shelling anymore. Oh, it's over. It's finally over.
Yeah.
If I might piggyback on that, Charlie, I'm glad that you're emphasizing sound because I think there's a thematic connection to the title.
Ah, look at that.
OMG.
Should we tell Charlie how it ends? Should we explain the last chapter?
Yeah, no, I've got it right in front of me here. So he's narrating about how close he feels the end is, and it is about as bleak as can be. And you're on page 295, and he finishes this long monologue about how he just, everything's basically done. And then you turn the page, and down on the bottom of the page after 295, there are two short paragraphs that are not in Paul's voice, almost as though someone found his diary and had to add a footnote after the diarist died. And it says the following: he fell in October 1918 on a day that was so quiet and still on the whole front that the Army report confined itself to a single sentence: all quiet on the Western Front. He had fallen forward and lay on the earth as though sleeping. Turning him over, one saw that he could not have suffered long. His face had an expression of calm, as though almost glad the end had come.
Jesus.
Ooh. And I mean, yeah, you think about the way they chose to adapt that in the film. His sort of, he's almost in like a Eye of the Storm kind of thing, where he's just in this deep calm and with the butterfly. I mean, that's really such a creative way to evoke sort of the same feeling. I mean, it would have been admittedly kind of cheesy to try and ham fist in the all quiet on the Western Front line, like via titles or something.
And I'm so glad they didn't. I'm so glad they didn't.
Yeah.
The movie never explains the title, and the book only explains the title on the final page.
It's
Yeah. And instead of attempting to do a one-to-one match 'em up, here are the words in the book, here's a title on the movie screen, they did a translation. How do we turn that into an image? And they turned it into, and I'm not just talking about the butterfly in the hand, I'm talking about that superimposition of the marching men over the crosses, the field of crosses. They turned it into an image that speaks every bit as powerfully as that, but also stands on its own. For me, that's the art of adaptation, figuring out how to translate words into an image where it doesn't say exactly the same thing, but somehow it does.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. This is actually super crazy because I just had to write a paper about this. Because we were studying adaptation in Persepolis and how the two works tackle scenes differently. And there's this awesome sequence where Marjane Satrapi, who's the writer and the protagonist of the story. It's basically a story documenting her life growing up. She's living in Vienna. I believe she's originally from Iran, and she's living in Vienna, and she's all alone. She has no family there, and she breaks up with her boyfriend. And in the book, she's sort of complaining about her boyfriend in the present tense, and then Marjane Satrapi, the author, is saying how much she actually probably mistreated her boyfriend and how she expected him to. It's this incredible line to be her twin, her father, her mother, and her brother all at once. And it's like this beautiful, like, oh, okay, so we have this present perspective commenting on the past, and we have this mixture of points of view. And instead of in the movie just doing the same sort of narration, because that's what it does in the book, is it's just text commenting on pictures of the relationship, they have Margie, like the present tense character inside of the story, talk about the boyfriend, and in her head the boyfriend is like driveling with snot, has like a big giant nose, one eye is bigger than the other, pimple face, doing all these stupid things. And then immediately after, we see Margie trying to survive on the streets of Vienna. Like, she's starving, she is alone, she's isolated, and there's no dialogue. There's nothing. So you still get to see the same sort of conversation between Margie, the present tense character, and Marjane, the author, but you see it using visuals and using the juxtaposition of these two sequences. So I think you're entirely right when you say something like the soldiers marching across the field is evocative without using any of the same techniques as the novel, and finding the way to say the same thing, because that's sort of the really cool thing about movies, and it's the fun creative challenge you get with adaptation. And it's really made me believe that there's a lot of value in adaptations and learning how to adapt works to a different medium. And as someone working in the game space, a space that really doesn't have that many direct adaptations of things, it's going to be interesting to see, instead of like just adapting characters and ideas like we see in the Batman games, adapting stories and seeing how that works as a game narrative. And inherently there's differences, but lots of things to learn from movies. But I wanted to ask Kasey, because I haven't read the end of the story. Which ending stuck harder for you? Was it the one in the movie, or was it the one in the book?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say for me, I think I would put my vote towards the book. I don't know. I feel like I'm very easily impacted by books, like when especially really, really hard endings. Like, I remember when I was younger reading the ending of or like that all we all know that section of Bridge to Terabithia, and that sucked.
I don't. I've also never read Bridge to Terabithia.
Oh wow. Okay.
I'm actually just illiterate, guys.
So this movie definitely. Sorry. Yes, this movie, but talking about the book was very, because again, I was reading it in kind of like that class setting. But it was really frustrating. Not gonna lie. It was, and I'm a very emotional reader, as I'm a very like, I just inhale media very emotionally. So I've had instances where a book will end and I'll be like very upset about it, and I will not look or interact with that book for a while because it made me so angry. But this movie or this book was just very, it's one of those endings where it's like, that just sucks so bad. Like, is you're really, really hoping for that happy ending, for that, kind of that feeling that he is going to make it. Like, I hope he's going to make it, and he's going to be able to like live the life that he's been kind of dreaming of being on the front. But it was just really frustrating. But I definitely would say that I preferred the book ending, even though the movie ending was very, very, very well done.
Yeah, it really doesn't
read the book.
Yeah, you do. God, it doesn't give you an inch. Like it doesn't. It's such a
really
relentless
doesn't.
story. There's almost no moments of like respite. I never know. I mean, there's one moment where he's visiting home and he comes back and he finds Kat, and that's like a fleeting moment of happiness where you're like, oh yeah, love this guy, Kat, great. The boys are back together, and it's minutes later that he dies in Paul's arms, and it's so yeah, it's hard. It does not let up. Um, so I gotta ask, who's tuning in? Who's tuning in on October 7th, 2022 for the remake? We gotta see what happens.
Really funny that it's happening during the month of like Halloween horror. And this is the horrors of war. Dun, 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 dun. But
Yeah,
I will
maybe
be
we
tuning in.
What if we did 2 back-to-back, because we're bi-weekly now? We can do back-to-back all quiet episodes.
Oh boy. Hey guys, wait, I got a great idea. We get Max on permanently and we become an All Quiet on the Western Front podcast. Woo, woo, woo.
Well, we still have to pick up on. We have a lot of shows we need to do. We need to do the Socratic Train series.
Oh God. Oh no.
No, I think
Well,
we should.
I joked about this, in a private message to you, that if you really were serious about the Train series, I'll make you all watch Buster Keaton's The General, and that'll be your first silent film.
We do need to break that seal at some point. We need to truly become cinema, kino, if you will, and and watch a silent movie.
I do gotta say though, this was cinema for real.
You said that in front of a professor.
The best Letterboxd reviews just say this is cinema FR, and that's really how I want to leave this episode.
Wait, I have one more thing that I saw
right.
in the movie, and I want people's opinions on, because maybe I'm going crazy. Sorry, I'm also dying because I didn't drink enough water. But okay, one thing that I saw in the movies that I thought was really interesting, or at least the first part of All Quiet, was they keep shooting scenes of the war through windows and doors of houses. It's one of the first scenes in the movie you see on the streets of that German town whose name I do not know. All of the shots of the army marching through the street are through the perspective of like you're inside one of the stores or houses. And then later on, when the students, like the younger military people led by Paul, meet the older veterans, you also get to see some shots of the war and soldiers marching through the door of the house that they're staying in. And I couldn't really fully parse what that meant. So I'm interested what your thoughts are on it. I sort of came to the conclusion like war is on our doorsteps. And then the second part of that, where they're actually on the front, is sort of showing like a juxtaposition of like, hey, we were in this sort of safe space with the soldiers marching and it was looking really, pretty and grand. And now we are in a very not safe space, and the soldiers marching now means something much more dire. But I don't know if you guys noticed that, but any thoughts on what that can mean or why they use that technique?
I mean,
I'm glad that you took note of the aperture framing, because it's also on my notes. It's the last time I watched this with a group of students, it stood out to me, and I wrote that down. I have my old notes in front of me here, which I while I was rewatching.
Oh, wow.
So we saw the same thing, and that makes me so happy.
I think you guys are kindred spirits. I'm very happy that you guys. I'm happy. I'm really pleased with how this discussion has gone overall. I really feel like we did some good here today, everybody.
But James, you're avoiding the question, and so is Kasey. Interpret the doors. Charlie needs you to interpret the doors.
Yeah,
All right,
I'm lost.
Let me English class here. Let me take myself back to 10th grade here. I mean, I feel similar to your interpretation where you could talk about the pervasiveness of war and how, I mean, we see when Paul goes back home that his experiences on the front have tainted his home life, and he's sort of feels soiled or like he's unable to reacclimate, or that they don't understand. And I think it maybe could be read as the all-encompassing nature of war. I mean, you could read shots through house windows and doors while they're on the front as being sort of these soldiers on the front. That is their only home at this point. I mean, Paul talks about how when he's home on leave, all he wants to do is get back to the front, and when he's on the front, all he wants to do is go home. And I think it could sort of have something to do with that, how war taints everything else in your life. That would be my English paper thesis.
I guess my thesis would basically be that shooting through the doors and the windows kind of solidifies us as the audience, as the overall spectators of war, that we don't necessarily, like, we're not walking or marching with the soldiers. And even within that, being a spectator, sure, we see kind of like the grandness of the procession, and that's kind of stuff that you'll see projected in the media or to the public, that you'll see people walking or soldiers walking through town and being embraced in town and stuff like that. But simply knowing what we know throughout the entire movie, that they're not in that that space of kind of glorification that we put soldiers and war in, and that simply them marching from one possible death to another is way less glamorized. So yeah, that would probably be my thesis.
Oh, this is great. This is crowdsourcing at its finest. We're all going to watch Force Majeure next, which is the topic of my next paper, and discuss cinematography. And I'll bite your guys' takes.
I'd love to watch Force Majeure. I still haven't seen it yet, but I like, what is it, Ruben Austin, the director? He's done some good stuff. So The Square, for instance, pretty good. But I need to watch Force Majeure. So I'm in if you were serious about that.
I'm so in. What? Yes, of course.
New series where Max watches movies Charlie has to watch for his class, and then Charlie lifts the discussions for his essays. I am excited to start. My film class starts on Tuesday, and I'll definitely be sending you the syllabus as soon as I get it, Max.
That'll be great. As for the doors and the windows and the aperture framing, I want to give special attention to the way early on in the movie, in like the first scene, where the schoolmaster is making his plea that they all need to rise up and become the Iron Youth of Germany. In that scene, it's a single unbroken take that begins out on the street with the marching soldiers and pulls back through the windows and goes all the way to the back of the classroom. Just a beautiful shot that comes right out of German expressionist cinema of the time. So the kind of camera work you see in The Last Laugh, which was shot by Karl Freund, who was, again, another uncredited cinematographer on this project, or in Sunrise. And I think that kind of aperture framing was just sort of in the air in German expressionist cinema at the time, which of course donated a lot to Hollywood. We wouldn't have had film noir in the form that we did if people like Fritz Lang hadn't come over from Germany and invented it for us. Or basically adapted German expressionist cinema into film noir. But if you go back to another Lang project, Die Nibelungen, there are so many archways and doorways in that movie, it almost becomes self-parody. I just think that it was, again, my interpretation is a little more pragmatic and a little less literary. But I just think it was a matter of style at the time to shoot through a doorway because it looks cool. But I love your interpretations of it, because all those interpretations stand up, because it doesn't matter why they were doing it. It could be a received style. It's like we're allowed to interpret, tracking glitches on VHS tapes if we want to. The people who were mastering old home videos didn't really have much control over the tracking glitches on VHS tapes, but nevertheless they carry meaning. So whether something was conscious and intended or not, if it transmits meaning to us, that meaning is still there. So I love all your interpretations.
Yeah, go death of the author.
Guys, we passed. We passed the test. We did it.
Yes. We passed Max class. But
Does this count for 4 units transferable to any university?
Yeah, I know. Seriously, I'm gonna petition.
Be helpful.
You actually popped up on a class syllabus, Max, at my school. I think I told you about it, but I was looking. There's a class on editing here, and I was looking at an old syllabus from years past, and one of your essays is on the like recommended reading list. So
it's quite an honor. That's quite an honor. It really is.
Wow.
But yeah, I just thought that was really cool. And I again just thank you again so much for being here with us and talking to us today, teaching us young rascals a thing or two. I really this has been a really lovely conversation, and I just once again want to thank you for giving us your time. Been a real pleasure to have you.
It's a sincere pleasure to have been here. And in keeping with the film, I'm not going to let you have a happy ending. No, I'm sorry. I'm gonna jump in here and ruin your whole vibe, and then you can do all your Patreon plugs after that. But I've got to ruin the vibe first.
All right.
The last surviving British veteran of World War I was a guy named Harry Patch. He died at the age of 111 in the year 2009. So lived a long time. His take on World War I and war in general was as follows: war is organized murder and nothing else. Unquote.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you for listening. This has been another episode of the Socratic Cinema Podcast. I don't feel comfortable asking for money after that. Max, if there's anything you want to plug, places people can find you.
No, don't worry about it.
All right. Well, I think we're off then. Sincerely, thank you for listening. Max, thank you for being here. And we will see you next time.
Adios.
Adios.
Bye-bye.